What is up, guys? Welcome back to another weekly news video. There's two topics today. We're going to talk about the PSA grading change and why some of the commentary from people in the hobby has left me a little bit speechless with how dumb people are. So just bear with me on that. We'll then touch on backyard breaks again. Geoff Wilson has come out with some more strange comments that I want to unpack with you all today because, again, I'm getting pretty sick and tired of talking about these guys, but some of these things need to be kept front of mind. So just bear with me. We'll jump into the detail as always, and then I want to hear what you guys have to say down below. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is this PSA grading change story because they did it on the sly ever so slightly. They didn't really make an announcement, and it's now not only harder to get a PSA 10, but it's also harder to get a PSA 9. I'm going to show you why in a second. I don't know who discovered this. This sort of came from one random person on Twitter from what I can see, and then it went all over the internet. Everybody's talked about it. On face value, I think this is a good thing from PSA because I like the fact that 10s are harder to get. It just comes now down to their ability and whether or not they can police it and actually make sure that only 10s are getting 10s. But the key change is on the centering itself. You guys have probably seen it, but what the wording change on their website went ahead and did was say the image must be centered on the card with a tolerance not to exceed approximately 55 to 45% on the front. They used to say between 55 and 45 and 60-40, so it gave you a bit more tolerance. Now, what this basically means is that 55% of the card can't go off center, so it needs to be, you know, evenly split 55-45. That's not an even split, but you guys get what I mean. So obviously it's harder to get a 10 now. Same thing with a PSA 9. The old wording for a PSA 9 mentioned it could be within a tolerance of 60-40 to 65-35. This 65-35 piece is now gone. It just says 60-40 per my understanding. And one of those ones that, like I said, I think is a good thing from them because it's going to be harder to get these things. And we want 10s to actually mean 10s. So now the job's on PSA to actually watch what they're doing and make sure they're actually giving 10s to 10s. But the commentary in the last few days, like I said, left me a little bit speechless because you've had a lot of people come out and say, well, this is great. Existing 9 and 10s are going to go up in value, which sounds beyond preposterous to me. It makes no sense at all. You've got a company coming out today and saying, hey, 10s are harder to get, meaning that if you sent in a card yesterday, it would have got a PSA 10. You sent that same card back in today, it's going to get a PSA 9. So to sort of have that in mind and then hear people on the internet and say, hey, my 9s and 10s are now worth more, it just sounds insane to me. Like, surely the premium for a PSA 10 should now be on the slabs being graded under this new policy, not the ones that got a 10 when they shouldn't have. That does not make sense to me at all. And I don't know why people are sort of getting super excited about that. And when I read a lot of the commentary, people are talking about the facts that existing 9s and 10s are going to get upticks. That makes zero sense to me. I expect existing 9s and 10s to go down in value, if I'm being perfectly honest. It makes no sense. Why would I, as a collector, want to pay a premium for something that potentially would get downgraded under the new standards, or most likely would get downgraded under the new standards? Because we've all seen how terrible PSA has been at looking at that centering on those 10s. It makes sense why they've implemented this, but it doesn't make sense why people are getting excited. So, let me know your thoughts on that down below. I fully expect to see new 10s graded under this, in particular with, high-end cards are going to see premiums associated with it. It makes sense, right? They're harder to get. And sure, you could say, well, an existing PSA 10 might have that 55-45 centering, so it should command the same premium. Sure. But me as a buyer, I'm not going to pay more for that unless I see that it's graded under those new standards. And I'm not sure how PSA is going to go ahead and police it. I'm not sure if they're going to update the cert lookup on the page. So when you look up the certification, it says, hey, this was graded after this change. I think that would be good. Whether or not they do it, I don't know. But that's what I'd be expecting to see as a consumer. That's what I'd be, factoring in when I'm, paying for these things. I've got lots of PSA 9s in my collection. I'm a little bit nervous about those now being PSA 8s, but it goes back to what I've always said. Buy the card, not the slab. I also approach my collection to avoid situations like this. You've got a grading company coming out and changing their policy on a whim. No one knew this was coming, and there's nothing to say that this won't happen again with something else, making it even harder to get, high-end grades. So if you're somebody out there that's invested all this money in your PC, it could be gone overnight because of a grading change. It could be gone overnight because of a fraud case. It could be gone overnight because they go bankrupt and nobody wants to use PSA anymore. There's all these things that people sort of take for granted just because it says PSA 10 on that slab. Be very careful with how you're spending your money, where you're spending your money, and do it to mitigate as much risk as possible. The OGs on the channel will know that I approach my collection, in a way that funds itself. I get really guilty. I feel really guilty about paying for these cards. I've said this before. I grew up really poor, so me going ahead and paying $1,500 for a card doesn't make sense to me when I've got a family to sort of look after. I've got bills to pay and all these kind of things. So in my mind, I'm like, well, I like to collect things. I've got that collecting bug. I want to try and get this thing, but I don't want to, hinder my own family. So I approach my collection by funding it through the hobby. I buy and sell cards, I flip, and then use those profits to buy my PC, which then when stuff like this happens, oh no, my PSA 10 is now a PSA 9 or my 9 is now an 8, so be it. I've already paid for the card with profit, so if it goes to zero, I'm okay. Like, sure, I can miss out on flipping that card for even more, but you know, I'm got a $0 cost base in terms of what I've paid for it. So it goes to that theme. Anything can happen overnight. You don't know what these grading companies are going to do. You don't know what mistakes they're going to make. Think about these things before you go ahead and pay for your slabs just because it says PSA 10. And there are so many people out there that are doing it. And it goes to the comments I made a bit earlier. People saying existing 9s and 10s are going to go up in value. That just seems so bloody idiotic. It makes no sense to me. And I want to know, maybe I'm missing something down in the comments below. So please share it and let me know. But one of those ones that, like I said, makes no sense. Now, the other thing I want to quickly touch on relates to backyard breaks once again. If you've not seen my last 3 videos, I'm sick of talking about these guys, but it's probably worth having a look. The last video in particular has done really well. It's got a lot of views because it's sort of made the mainstream. Now, people didn't like when I called Newsmax mainstream. Obviously, I'm based in Australia. I don't know how big they actually are, but when I went ahead and recorded that video, I researched a little bit further and I saw their ratings were actually quite high. They outrated CNN at times. So whilst they are a cable news network and they seem to be very far right, you can't argue that they've got a lot of viewers going their way. And my thought process is, it sort of doesn't matter whether they are a Newsmax or a CNN or a Fox. Sure, those other 2 networks they're related to would actually get more eyes on them. But this is still a big deal, and it still goes to the things that I said. You've basically got a news channel here with millions of viewers talking about whatnot and the whole backyard break scandal where Grant said those disgusting things about a fictitious daughter. That's going to bring more eyes to our industry. It's not something that we necessarily want. So check these videos out if you haven't seen them. It's an interesting one. It's a really disappointing one. It's a disgusting one. And I hope we see the back of Grant for good, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I hope we see backyard breaks actually get reprimanded by whatnot. So whether or not that happens, who knows? But just check out my videos for my thoughts on that situation. There's one thing here relating to whatnot that I actually want to reference Geoff on that I think shows he's out of touch. Because again, this doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to share my thoughts in a second. I'm going to play the video for you now and then talk you through it.
Right? We strive to do that here at Cards HQ. I would like to see a platform like Whatnot, like Fanatics Live, actually rate content creators the same way that a movie would be rated. I want family-friendly, GPG,
parental guide,
and then you want your backyard breaks. That stuff can go on channels that, you know, you got to be age verified. You got to consent knowing what you're getting into when you get into that stream. That's the, you know, I think the channels that you get greeted with when you come into a Whatnot app or Fanatics Live app should all be channels that at first are they're family friendly, right? You got to like opt in to see the other stuff. And the family friendly channels should take a pledge, should have a code of conduct, no profanity, no political discussion, no sexualization of women or discussion about any topic related to that on the channel. You know, certain things of that nature, right? That breakers, content creators can opt into, and then if they agree to that and they adhere to those rules, they're classified as family friendly, and then they get first and foremost promotion in the app. That's what I think they should do. I've made that suggestion to Whatnot. I will continue to push that suggestion. I think that would be a step forward. It doesn't solve or excuse what happened here, but at least it would, when this type of thing happens again, and hopefully nothing quite this disgusting happens again, but at least would help assure that there's not kids in the room listening, which I'm sure there were.
Now, obviously, Geoff has some pretty interesting comments there. I think they are pretty silly, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. I sort of applaud him for coming out with an opinion and saying he's talked to those things about Whatnot. But like we touched on in the last couple of videos, he's shown that he's completely spineless throughout this whole situation because he went for the PC approach and tried to sort of be the guy that everybody likes instead of standing up and using his platform to get the right outcome with Whatnot in the first place. The reason why I don't like this goes to things we spoke about in that last video. So Geoff mentioned things like having a PG room, having an M room, having an MA room, having an R room, X room, whatever it is, right? That doesn't make sense to me for many, many reasons. And one of those were things that I mentioned in this video, right? Sports card companies these days are trying to be mainstream. They're trying to be these premium brands that people want to spend a lot of money on. And I don't think it makes sense to be having people like Backyard Breaks associated with those brands when they go ahead and say the things they do, because it tarnishes the brand. And whilst Geoff says, well, people aren't going to see those things because you have to consent before you can join those rooms, or you have to prove your age. You know, if you're a Topps or you're a Panini or you're a PSA and you've got these people tarnishing your brand name by saying vulgar and disgusting things, and that stuff then goes ahead and gets shared around the internet, kids are going to see that anyway. So the way you sort of police it is not meant to make these private rooms. It's meant to say, hey guys, we have standards, we have a code of conduct, we have a policy. You guys don't meet it. You're going to get out of here. We don't want to deal with you guys. You don't fit what we want to try and build this hobby into. And maybe I'm sort of, too off base when it comes to these kinds of comics. I'm certainly for free speech and PC mindset in general. I don't really like. I like people being allowed to speak their minds. So, it's unfortunate that people can't go on a platform and swear. But I think when you're selling brands, you're getting paid to market brands. I think you need to be held to a higher standard, like I said in that last video. It's also interesting that Geoff talked about putting PG rooms to sort of restrict kids on there and whatnot. He's made that suggestion to them. If whatnot go ahead and put that into practice, again, that doesn't make sense to me. I hate the idea that kids can go on that platform and use it anyway, because chances are they're making fake names, they're verifying themselves under their parents, and they're going ahead and gambling. They're probably going to do that anyway. And so many people will say that it's not gambling. I just don't like the fact that you can have kids go on those platforms and sort of get those habits in mind. And when you go ahead and look at how, a whatnot operates, and then you go ahead and watch how a sportsbook operates and some of these other games that go on, they're very much aligned. And it feels like they're prepping people, they're grooming people to go ahead and then make that transition into proper gambling and proper sportsbooks. And I don't like it. So, I would like them just to not allow kids on there at all. I don't like the fact that you can have a targeted breaking room for kids or a targeted selling room for kids. That just seems odd to me. And it seems like it's going to allow people to sort of prey on the unsuspecting and prey on the people that can sort of dig themselves a hole. And we've talked about part of the reason why I don't like, buying on whatnot versus buying elsewhere, because the whole ability for you to sort of dig yourself a grave on a break and just keep bidding because all you have to do is press a button, as opposed to going to a casino and getting money out and all that kind of thing. It's just a whole element I don't like. So I'm rambling now. I want to hear what you guys have to say down below. One thing I think I forgot to mention a bit earlier when referencing the code of conduct that Geoff mentioned when it came to whatnot, they've already got one right. And Backyard Breaks have clearly breached that, and they've breached it multiple times. So my thought process is you don't need to change everything you're doing. Just change the way you enforce your code of conduct. It's not that hard. They've already breached it. Hold them accountable to it. You don't need to go ahead and then make all these other rooms or do all these other things. Just hold people accountable to the standards you're setting. It doesn't make any sense to me to not do that. It's not complicated. And to my points earlier, it's good that Geoff is now talking about these things, but mate, we needed you to do this over a week ago. And it's a disgrace that you didn't do it a week ago. And it just shows that you've got no backbone, which is really disappointing. So, as always, please share your thoughts down below. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Maybe I'm off base with those whatnot comments when it comes to kids being able to buy and sell, but I don't like it. I think the whole thing stinks, if I'm being honest with you. And, I think there are ways they could make it better, but, I'll save those for another day. So anyway, that's it for today. Let me know your thoughts down below. I'm going on Jeremy Lee's live stream, probably 12 or so hours after this video drops. So keep an eye out on that. That's the Sports Card Live channel. We're going to be talking about, or I'll be talking about Backyard Breaks and this whole PSA situation. It's one of those ones, again, to go back to that first topic. The fact you've got people jumping up and down today because existing 9s and 10s are going to be worth more because they're going to be harder to get today just seems, counterintuitive. It seems like it's a bit of a oxymoron is the word I was looking for. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.